When did the Middle Ages end in England? When I attended school in the early 2010s, we were taught that the Middle Ages in England ended in 1485 after the Battle of Bosworth Field during the War of the Roses. Apparently, after the battle, everyone joined together and just collectively agreed that the Middle Ages was over in England because of the rise of a new dynasty, the Tudor dynasty, led by Henry VII, or Henry Tudor, kicking off the English Renaissance, which the term Renaissance is its own problem. The last Plantagenet king, Richard III, was killed at the Battle of Bosworth. The Plantagenets were a dynasty that ruled England since 1154, created from the joining of Empress Matilda, the daughter and heir to King Henry I of England, and her second husband, Geoffrey Plantagenet, Count of Anjou. Their son, Henry Fitz-Empress, would become Henry II of England, the first Plantagenet king. Richard III is so far the last English king to die in battle. As I got older and researched more about the Middle Ages, I came to disagree with this theory, and so do other people. Instead, I've created some concept theories and looked at some other existing ones on when the Middle Ages in England came to an end. The Middle Ages in England is a period of human history starting typically from the end of late antiquity or the withdrawal of the Roman legions from Britain at the start of the 5th century, leading to the Germanic migration into Britain, eventually forming the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and in the 9th century, the Kingdom of England was created. That's the summarized version. These 5 theories are interpretations of when the Middle Ages in England ended, with the final theory being my own personal belief. But if we end the Middle Ages at King Richard's death, then the last phrase of the English Middle Ages could be, "A horse! A horse! My kingdom for a horse!" 500 to 1500 is a tidy period of history that works as a basis for 1,000 years of history into one setting, but broken up into distinctive periods. It's tidy and presentable, which works for most people. Let's start with the funniest theory that the Middle Ages in England ended when England and France stopped fighting each other. One consequence of the Norman conquest of England in 1066 was that England and France were joined closer together than ever before, politically, territorially, and culturally. After the Norman conquest, successive English monarchs spoke French as their first language. It was not until Henry IV in 1399 that an English king spoke English as their first language. Over the centuries since 1066, England and France have been bitter rivals. The most famous of these conflicts was the 116 Years' War, a period of conflict started when Edward III in 1337 claimed the title of King of France. The final battle of the war was the Battle of Castillon in 1453. That year is an interesting one, as some people consider 1453 to be the last year of the Middle Ages, because not only as it was the last battle of the 116 Years' War, but also the end of the Roman Empire, with the conquest of Constantinople in May. Again, it's not a bad way of ending the Middle Ages, with the end of the Roman Empire, as that was an important marker alongside the final battle of the 116 Years' War. Yet technically, England and France were still at war until a treaty in 1475. Over the centuries, England and France would fight each other all across Europe and the wider world. The most famous of these conflicts would be known as the Napoleonic Wars, named after the French Emperor Napoleon, who rose to power on the backdrop of the French Revolution, where the French people got rid of the monarchy, and then in a twist of hypocrisy, the French gained an emperor. Talk about one step forward, two steps back. The last battle of this period of war was the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, in which Napoleon attempted to return to plague Europe again. Yet a combined British and Prussian army defeated him. The Battle of Waterloo is an important marking point for world history, inspiring artworks and a fantastic show following the exploits of a certain lieutenant colonel. In other words, the end of the Napoleonic Wars was the last time that England and France fought together, thus ending the Middle Ages in England. I'm not counting World War II because that was not against all of France. The next theory is that the end of the English wool trade is the true end of the Middle Ages in England. Throughout the Middle Ages and right up until the 19th century, England relied heavily on its agricultural economy, from which the cultivation of crops such as wheat, rye, oats, barley, peas and beans, as well as rearing animals such as cattle, pigs, chickens, etc., which provided all manner of useful items. Everything that could be used was used. England is an ideal place to rear sheep due to its climate. The wool produced became England's biggest export during the High and Late Middle Ages. One major location was Flanders, where the wool was refined into cloth. English wool was considered the finest in quality in all of Europe. Even free men from a poorer background could become rich by utilizing the commercial power of English wool. The clergy especially invested in the keeping of sheep. One location in England that benefited immensely from trading wool was the Cotswolds. An example is Hales Abbey, founded in 1246, which became incredibly rich due to the keeping of sheep, with the quality of the wool being highly prized to Italian merchants. The abbey was one of many victims of Henry VIII's suppression of the monasteries, with Hales being stripped and left in a ruin in 1539. Wool became so important for English trade that it affected the political, commercial and the very land itself in England, with the enclosure of common land for sheep farming, as it didn't take a lot of manpower to rear sheep over the cultivation of crops. One pamphlet published in 1550 was titled "The Decay of England Only by the Great Multitude of Sheep." The English wool trade and its commercial effects on England is incredibly complex and deserves its own video, but to summarize how the Middle Ages in England ended with the wool trade's decline. However, English wool went through periods of decline and resurgence over the centuries. By the time of the Industrial Revolution in Britain, wool as a raw material would be used for producing cloth on a huge industrial scale to match the demands of the British Empire, with the city of Leeds becoming the top manufacturer until the 1960s, with the final decline of English wool due to cheaper imports from abroad. So, the Middle Ages in England ended in the 1960s. Another theory is that the Middle Ages never existed at all. This theory is called the Phantom Time Conspiracy. It's complete bollocks and doesn't work at all with any theories of when the Middle Ages ended in England. Rather, it seeks to assert that a period of just under 300 years didn't occur, the years of 614 to 911 AD, with various theories being offered. The most prominent one being that the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III conspired with a pope to invent the years mentioned as historical fiction. So, no Charlemagne, no Vikings, no Islamic expansions, nothing. This theory is just a mad conspiracy theory and holds no credence. I just found the theory to be rather funny to ridicule. The last theory before we move on to my own personal opinion. The Middle Ages ended when the Kingdom of England transformed into the Kingdom of Great Britain. This theory bases from the fact that the Kingdom of England, which formed in the early Middle Ages, ends when it was united with Scotland as one kingdom in 1707 through the Acts of Union. England and Scotland have had a tumultuous relationship ever since they formed, with various periods of cooperation and upheaval. By the year 1707, England and Scotland had been under a joint union led by the Scottish Stuart dynasty, who first inherited England in 1603 after the death of Elizabeth I, the last Tudor monarch. James VI of Scotland was now also James I of England. There are many reasons as to why the Acts of Union happened, but to the theory, those reasons don't matter, as the Kingdom of England transformed into the Kingdom of Great Britain, thus ending the Middle Ages in England. The final theory is that the Middle Ages in England ended with the death of King Henry VIII, making him the last king of the Middle Ages in England. If you've watched my channel for a while now, or if you follow me on social media, you'll know that I personally think that Henry VIII is the worst king of England, so excuse my incredibly biased take here. The reasons behind this theory stem from the fact that Henry achieved something that most of the medieval English kings wanted: complete control over the church. If you study the history of England, you'll learn about the constant power struggles between the kings of England and the Catholic Church, with some cases becoming paramount moments in English history. For example, the murder of Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, in 1170. King John attempted somewhat to take what he could from the church before capitulating to the Pope. And what Henry VIII did, by breaking away from the Catholic Church, was end a period of history stretching back to 597, when Augustus of Canterbury started to convert the pagan Anglo-Saxons to Catholicism. Since England had always been a part of the Church since its creation, Catholicism was integral to its history. And with English history, there are certain points where fundamental change occurred, becoming a defining moment. The Viking attacks during the 9th century, the Danelaw, and one of the most significant, the Norman conquest of England, which, in my opinion, is level with what King Henry VIII achieved, because if we compare the two, they share a similar scale, which involved both massive political change and huge physical changes in the landscape of England. The Normans began a series of building works with the construction of castles, cathedrals, etc., whereas King Henry and his dissolution of the monasteries tore down so much. For me personally, I've excavated his handiwork during an archaeological dig at Evesham Abbey, which is one reason why I advocate for this theory. Because of these changes, which you could argue is on par with the rising of the Tudor dynasty after the Battle of Bosworth, one other reason is King Henry making himself the head of the Church of England, he's elevating his own kingship, becoming even more powerful, which is one of the first instances of an English king implementing the divine rights of kings. This again adds another change from before. No king of England previously had accumulated such power and wealth due to the drastic changes King Henry brought forward. It's also vexing to me because of so much of English heritage was destroyed because of this. So, to summarise, the Middle Ages in England ends with King Henry because of the monumental changes to England he implemented, the physical landscape changing, and the fact that England was no longer a member of the Catholic Church. I'll acknowledge that the hole in this theory is of course Mary Tudor bringing Catholicism back to England, yet it didn't last and it didn't bring back the already demolished sites. So that was 5 theories on when the Middle Ages in England ended. If you have your own theories, I would enjoy reading them in the comments section, and if you'd like to support the channel, you can through Patreon or YouTube channel membership.